Welcome to Iraq Matters, podcasting from the Old Railway Depot in Swan Poodle, Washington, D.C.
Good coffee today.
Very good coffee. Yeah. So this is Eric.
Shakumaku, dear listeners. This is Taif. And today we have a really special episode for you.
You know, it's getting really cold right now. And many people don't realize this, but, you know, they think of Iraq as a desert. Well, believe it or not, it gets really cold in Iraq.
And you know, Eric, in Iraq we have this common phrase. We say, يضرب بالعظم, which means the cold hits the bone. And you'll hear that all the time. So winter in Iraq is serious stuff.
Yeah, so occasionally you'll even see snow as far south as Baghdad, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I left Iraq in 2006, and when I was there, I never saw snow in Baghdad. But by the time I left Iraq, I was reading the news that it started snowing in Baghdad. For the past 2 winters, it snowed there, and you can testify to the snow in the winter, right?
Yeah, I mean, living in Sulaymaniyah in northern Iraq in the Kurdistan region, every winter I was there was snow, and it gets really cold. And half the population that has been recently displaced have fled to the Kurdistan region. So they're going to be facing freezing temperatures soon.
So to all of you out there, this is an American telling you that it snows in Iraq.
That's right. So I had an opportunity to talk to Daryl Grisgraber, a senior advocate at Refugees International, which is a really amazing organization. They do life-saving advocacy on refugees worldwide and on displaced persons. She was just in Iraq, so I had an opportunity. She just got back, had a chance to sit down and talk with her about what she saw, and about this very question about this, humanitarian emergency that is approaching of winter, and so many people who are displaced and they still don't have proper shelter to protect themselves from the elements. So that's what we dedicate today's program to.
So before we begin the interview, let's start with an Iraq update. Eric, can you tell us about the top news stories you're hearing from Iraq and the region?
Sure. Well, there's this story in today's BBC, Turkey to let Iraq Kurds join Kobani fight. This is actually quite significant. Many of our listeners know that there's this historic challenge between Turkey and the PKK, which is a Kurdish militia that's been fighting for more autonomy within Turkey. And in Kobani, you have the Kurds that have militias that are affiliated with the PKK. So Turkey has not been very supportive while Kobani has been under siege by ISIS. Now Turkey is allowing Peshmerga from Iraqi Kurdistan to join in the fight in Kobani and help defend the town from ISIS.
Excellent.
Now, the other top news story, UN humanitarian chief Valerie Amos is in Turkey. In fact, I think she's flying out today, but she was there over the weekend. And the big story is that she confirmed that there is a much larger number of Syrian refugees in Turkey. You know, the numbers of Syrian refugees who have been registered is in the hundreds of thousands, but she confirmed that the total number of Syrian refugees who are in Turkey right now is estimated to be over 1.3 million. It's a huge number, and that's part of a much larger number. You know, there's an even greater number of Syrian refugees who are in Lebanon. The total number of Syrian refugees right now in the region is 3.6 million. And then within Syria, another 6.5 million Syrians have been forced to flee their homes and are internally displaced within Syria. So it's a huge number. That with what's happening in Kobani, this is the latest wave. This is the newest wave of displacement. And the estimate is somewhere around 250,000 Syrian Kurds from Kobani have fled into Turkey.
Unbelievable.
Here's another story. This is also being reported by BBC. Australia reaches agreement with Iraq to send 200 special forces to train Iraqi troops. This means that in addition to the US sending advisors, and you have the UK has sent advisors to train Iraqi forces, you now have Australia. Of course, this is part of a much larger coalition of more than 60 countries. And the newest country to join that coalition is Canada.
And also this weekend there was a really important political development in Iraq. Is that right?
That is correct. Iraq's parliament approves ministers for defense and interior. That's being reported by the New York Times. This is actually a really huge development because let's turn the clock back. Under Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, who's no longer the Prime Minister, thank God, he did not ever allow for the parliament to approve ministers for defense and interior. Instead, he appointed himself. He was the self-appointed, acting minister for interior and defense throughout his last premiership. There's a new sheriff in town. His name is Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi. He is definitely one that's more inclined to compromise. His first choices to be head of the Ministry of Defense and Interior were not approved by Parliament, so he compromised and worked to find the consensus candidate. And the new nominees were approved by Parliament, which I think is really important. So you have Member of Parliament Khalid al-Obeidi, who is part of the Nujafi bloc. He will now be the Minister of Defense. He's a career military, I think 18 years in Iraq's Air Force, aviation engineer. And he is, as a Member of Parliament, he actually represents Mosul, which is one of the cities that has fallen to ISIS. And then you have Mohammed Salam al-Ghaban, and you can probably do a better job pronouncing that name.
Yeah, it's like Mohammed Salam al-Ghaban. It's not that different.
Okay. And he is from the Badr organization, which is one of the Shia political parties, and he now will be head of interior. So the fact that there was enough of a consensus among the parliament, because you have to have a 2/3 majority to be able to approve these officials. It's also significant that this happened so fast.
Yep.
I mean, I know the New York Times reported after delay, these parliament approves these ministers. Keep in mind, this is the fastest that I've seen a government formed in Iraq in a long, long time. So I think this is a testament to the fact that many of the major political parties are coming together and recognize what's at stake. And then also, the savvy of some of the new officials that are in charge, including Iraq's new Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi.
Thanks, Eric. Now let's get to the most important story.
That's right. I mean, there's always all this attention on security developments, on political developments. These are important developments, don't get me wrong. But there's not enough attention on the humanitarian crisis in the region. And we are talking about a serious emergency. So many people are going to be left out in the cold this winter. People are scrambling to be able to provide shelter. So we dedicate the rest of this program to a special interview with Daryl Grisgraber of Refugees International.
Great. So lay back and enjoy the show.
Hello, dear listeners. This is Eric Essefson with Iraq Matters. I'm really pleased to be joined by Daryl Grisgraber this morning. Daryl is a senior advocate for Refugees International, covering the Middle East and North Africa, and is recently back from a trip to Iraq. So we're here. I thought we'd have a conversation to talk a little bit about your trip and where you went and what you saw.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, this was a short trip. We're there just for 10 days from mid-September to the end of September. And we were in Erbil and Dohuk governorates, kind of writ large. So Erbil City and Dohuk City certainly, but we are also out in kind of the more, kind of the areas around the cities where a lot of informal settlements have happened. And in Dohuk governorate in particular, in an area called Zaho, where a lot of the IDPs have gone. I mean, just IDPs as far as the eye can see. I mean, like anywhere in Zaho you look, there is a displaced person there. In Dohuk City, they're, a little slightly less obviously visible, but Zaho is just purely, full of IDPs at this point.
And so you traveled through Erbil and Dohuk governorates, which are part of the Kurdistan region of Iraq.
Yes.
In the north.
Exactly, yeah. Sulaymaniyah, of course, is part of the KRI as well. The numbers of IDPs there are a little bit smaller. Same for Syrian refugees, which is also a population we were looking at. And just in the interest of time, because we didn't have several weeks to do this trip, we ended up not going to Sulaymaniyah. But most of what we're talking about here today applies in Suli as well.
So describe in Dohuk what's roughly the population of Dohuk, and then how many people in the province are either Syrian refugees or displaced Iraqis
Yeah,
that
gotcha.
have fled there.
There are about 500,000 IDPs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the huge majority of them are in Dohuk Governorate. Yeah. And then the refugees there, about half of all the Syrian refugees are in Dohuk. So we're looking at about 600,000 people who are not habitual residents of Dohuk and who are there now trying to get by and live in that community.
So that sounds, I mean, just in terms of the total population, I think that's almost out of every 3 people, 1 person is going to be either a refugee or a displaced Iraqi.
That sounds about right. I mean, the thing we've been saying about the internally displaced is that if you figure the population of the whole KRI is anywhere between 5 and 6 million, depending who you ask, with 1 million displaced people, IDPs or refugees, we're talking a proportion just like Lebanon, right? You always hear like, oh, Syrian refugees, 1 out of 4 people in Lebanon is a Syrian refugee. Well, it's the same thing in the KRI, like 1 out of 4 or 5 people in the KRI is a displaced person who's not normally there. And it's, you know, the space, the amount of geographic space we're talking about is pretty comparable for cramming all those people in.
So share with our listeners a little bit about the scale and urgency of the crisis. How big is it, and what's particularly urgent at this time?
Really big. Yeah. to give the short answer, it's huge. So, all right, let's talk about the KRI first. So you figure there were 215,000 Syrian refugees that ended up there over the course of the past several years. So now we've added on to that close to 1 million IDPs. And this is just in the KRI, remember, just in those 3 governorates.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there are, although we did not go outside of the KRI, the fact is there are well over 1 million IDPs in the rest of Iraq as well. So it's important not to forget those, because everybody who fled didn't just go to the KRI. They're still all over Iraq as well.
And IDPs are internally
displaced persons. Yeah. So people who fled conflict, or what we might think of as sort of a refugee-like situation, but they have gone somewhere else inside their own country instead of crossing an international border to another country, but fleeing very much the same types of persecution and situations that refugees flee traditionally.
So we're talking about well over 1 million, like what the total estimate is about 1.8 million people have fled their homes so far this year. Is that
I think it's even a bit higher than that. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's getting quite close to 2 million at this point. So yeah, so going back to how big is it and how urgent is it, it's huge. And it's really urgent, particularly in some of the areas we were looking at, because it's northern Iraq, of course, and winter is coming on really fast.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we have, 2-3 weeks before it really starts to get cold? And the huge majority of people we met are living either in, pitched tents in public parks. They're living in unfinished buildings. And when I say that, I don't just mean sort of like, there's no pictures on the walls. Yeah. It means there are no walls. It's just a building full of rebar and concrete floors and nothing else. And people are living up on those floors. And so, as the cold weather comes, there are going to be certainly hardships and health problems, if not out and out fatalities, if we can't get these people into adequate shelter in time. The KRI, the government of Iraq, certainly the UN, the aid agencies, the local NGOs, everyone is aware that winter is coming. But again, coordinating that response and really systematically providing people with shelter is such an enormous task and has to be very well organized, and that's hard to do, right? The KRG has decided that one of their kind of quick responses is going to be to set up camps for the IDPs. Camps are never a first choice.
And how many camps already exist, and how many new camps are they building?
They are talking about having a total of 26, and about 20 or 21 of them are either sort of funded and planned or under construction. But the fact is only probably 5 or 6 exist at this point, and are ready to have people move into.
And the camps that exist, are these camps that are currently hosting Syrian refugees, or is that a whole separate number?
No, that's
of camps?
A completely separate thing.
Okay, so these are the new camps to respond to displaced Iraqis.
They are.
On top of at least a half dozen large camps for Syrian refugees.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Some of them used to be Syrian refugee camps where everyone was able to be relocated, and so they're using them for the IDPs now. So, a few of them were already physically established. But yeah, there's generally no mixing of the populations in the response, for better or for worse. So camps are never a first choice for displaced people, right? They kind of restrict freedom of movement. There's always a concern of them creating dependence, that sort of thing. But at the same time, when you need this much shelter this fast, what are you going to do? So the KRG decided on this, and I think in the interest of sort of in the best interest of the IDPs, it's something that has to be done. However, it needs to be done in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Let's even say 6 before the weather gets really brutal, right? Yeah. And they're having a hard time getting all of this done. Like, even if they had all the money in the world, can you build that many camps in that period of time? I mean, like, most of the land has to be negotiated to be leased from the government or from private owners. And then you have to clear it, and then you have to put up tents, and then you have to make sure the NGO is providing services. So it's a super complicated operation. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, all we can do is just like hope that it's going to go fast enough and keep urging them to do it quickly.
And so, you know, in some of these locations, I'd imagine where it became a destination of a lot of those fleeing places like Sinjar and Karakush and even Mosul, in those areas, they probably even outnumber the host community.
Oh, I think so. We didn't look at that specifically just because it's all kind of informal urban IDPs, and it's really hard to get a count of who's doing what, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, and that's sort of an important point to raise, right, is that the humanitarian response is very much in its nascent stages still. You know, just that happens for all kinds of reasons that, like, you know, some could be avoided, some we completely understand and it's normal. But the fact is there's no good census done yet of how many IDPs really we're talking about. And it's really hard to find them because they're scattered all over the place. Where you have settlements or a couple of transit camps, like in Erbil Governorate, you can count people, right? But I mean, even the people who took us out to talk with IDPs in Zaho, for example, we were just stopping by a public park in the middle of the city saying, like, okay, what's it like living here, sort of thing. Like, and they had not seen aid organizations. The ones who had, you know, a few people might come and say, do you need food? How are you getting clean water? And, you know, drop off a few things here and there, maybe some rice or something. But the fact is, the outreach so far has been so spotty that, I mean, I don't want to create like some alarmist situation, but like there could be quite a few more people than we even expect at this point. Although I like to think that, you know, humanitarian professionals are accustomed to estimating numbers, and they're probably about right. But the point is, we don't really know because it's so hard to get to some of these people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. No, I mean, that's got to be really scary. And in addition to these unfinished buildings and, you know, being in underpasses or being out in the field in tents, are there government buildings that we're seeing a lot of displaced Iraqis who are currently occupying?
Yeah, not government buildings precisely, but for example, the churches in Erbil tend to have big walled compounds with, you know, community use buildings on the compound, that sort of thing, and those are packed with IDPs, with the Christians in particular. They went to the churches who were willing to help them quite quickly. But even those buildings, they're basically just not cinder blocks precisely, but stone blocks, sort of, and there's no heat in them. Wow. And so, you know, if you have 30 or 40 people crammed into them in the middle of winter, you know, that will create a tiny bit of heat, but they're not heated buildings. There are people occupying schools like crazy, and you've probably heard a little bit about this, right? Yeah. The schools, for the most part, are in fact made of cinder blocks, you know, and they're not necessarily all that well constructed. Like when the wind blows, it will go in there. And so it's not as if even the people in what we call standard buildings, you know, per se, are necessarily protected from the winter as well. There are a number of cultural centers, like for Christians or Yazidis, all over those two governorates as well, that people are packed into. And again, they're reasonably well-constructed buildings, but, you know, they have balconies on the back, and there are people living on the roof, and you just can't do that when the winter time comes.
Yeah. And with the schools, I mean, I have heard some of the reports. There was a great report in the New York Times, and NPR has covered this as well, where the government has delayed the reopening of schools. So right now, you know, I mean, here in the U.S., obviously our kids are in school right now. Universities have started up, but in Iraq, the delay, I think currently they're saying November. Is that right?
Mid-November. So it's not the beginning of November. And I believe that is the second delay that happened. I feel like the first deadline may have been mid-October. Yeah, so people are in the schools. There are close to, I think, 1,000 schools at this point that are occupied by IDPs. Wow. Close to 1,000. I don't know the exact number.
And is that just in the Kurdistan region?
Yes.
Okay, so over 1,000 schools.
Yeah, and it's to give a little bit of a description. People are living in the classrooms. I mean, so you get 30 to 40 people per room. At night, they lay down mattresses, and you can't even walk in between them because everyone's got to get their mattress on the floor. During the day, they just stack them up on the side of the walls, and then the room is kind of more open. But we're talking about entire schools crammed full of people like this. There's still maps on the walls and like whiteboards hanging by the windows and that sort of thing. Yeah. So the schools were meant to be cleared out by October 15th, I think, to start the school year. That got delayed again because there weren't a lot of good options for shelter. So right now, the idea is that by mid-November, the schools will be cleared out. But what that means really is that people will have to be relocated, and the people in the schools are the highest priority for moving them to these camps that are being built. Yep. But then the buildings, for the most part, have to be rehabilitated as well, and that takes some time. So if you look at that, really, probably in the next 2.5 weeks, that's when everyone has to be moved out so that there's time to renovate the buildings and repair them in time for school to start again. Wow. So, of course, we're all hoping this can happen, and there is a plan in place to make that happen. And, we have to hope for the best and kind of encourage the best, because if the school year can't start by mid-November, it's really going to be creating some social tensions in the KRI. And, right now things are stable enough, and the population there is being, as helpful as it probably can be under these circumstances. But if the school year gets delayed for much longer, we're practically through a whole semester by mid-November anyway, right? People think that there will be problems.
Paint a picture for us, the stories of some of the individuals and families that you met.
The one that comes to mind most readily is we met a large family from Sinjar. So they had left in August, when kind of that big wave of people was leaving Sinjar. It was August, right? Yeah. But this particular family, in fact, had been in Sinjar when ISIS came and fled ISIS in particular. Wow. So they hadn't been trapped on the mountain. They just fled when ISIS first came. When it got to the point of leaving Sinjar, they were robbed of everything they had by ISIS. So they arrived literally with only the clothes on their backs. I know it's a phrase we use a lot for displaced people, right? But they really did. And on the way, somewhere in between Sinjar and getting to Erbil, they had a 12-year-old daughter who got killed by a mortar. So they arrived like just completely traumatized and with nothing whatsoever. They didn't know anyone in Erbil, so like so many people, they just took up residence where they could. So we found them living in an abandoned construction lot in Erbil. So they were just outside of an unfinished building, and it was just a lot full of like chunks of concrete and what used to be a little guard's shack, and then a whole bunch of open space. And I mean, any direction you look in, you see like the big like city, not skyscrapers in Erbil, but the city buildings like rising all around you. It was a woman who, was probably in her 30s. She was the head of the family. And there certainly were, senior men in the family, but there were 3 disabled people, and 2 of the senior men were disabled. And this woman's mother was as well. They literally, couldn't walk, and it had to be carried all this way to Erbil. There were probably 7, 8, 9 small children, like under the age of 12, I would say, as well as a handful of, teenagers or just preteens sort of. And they had nothing. They were just living, as many as they could cram into the guard shack at night would sleep in there. But then you could see where people were sleeping out in the open, like basically on the chunks of concrete in this open lot. One of the kids had been wounded on the way from Sinjar. They couldn't get health care, and so they had to, they'd gone to the hospital there. But when they got to Erbil, they couldn't afford healthcare, so they had to pull stitches out of her head wound by hand, like that. And this woman was clearly, particularly devastated by the loss of her daughter. I think the littler kids probably didn't quite get it at this point. But it's noteworthy because she, in addition to not knowing what to do or not being able to provide, even if they'd been in better circumstances, this woman was so traumatized that it's hard to guess what she may or may not have been able to offer to them. So 3 disabled adults who are getting no assistance whatsoever. The kids are running around barefoot in this empty lot that's full of old construction materials. They can't go to a doctor. They'd gotten 1 distribution of food from a local NGO who had come across them. And when we got there, we then brought them together with the UNHCR as well. And so they hopefully are getting some help at this point. I need to follow up on that. But this was going to be their life for the foreseeable future. Living outdoors, the kids would not be in school, nobody was working, and the winter was coming. And we said to this woman, what do you think you're going to do? Winter's coming in a few weeks. And just the response you get from so many people is just, God will tell us. And I mean, there's nothing to do with that. And it was interesting because we talked to them about whether or not they'd be willing to move into an IDP camp where they'd get food distributions and have health care and services, and a school might be set up, that sort of thing. And they really didn't want to. I mean, nobody wants to live in a camp or in a tent, right? And one of their big concerns was that they'll put us there in a tent, and that's not, it's not winter worthy, basically. I mean, I think they just didn't realize that there are winterized tents that are like up to the task kind of thing. So for them, it was better to be living in that tiny guard shack in an abandoned lot for winter than to go to a camp and be in a tent. And granted, there was some misunderstanding, but I think that's a really powerful indication of people just not knowing what to do and where they might be able to get help.
Well, and not having the outreach. The education and outreach hasn't been there. And it sounds like it's just so difficult to reach all of these displaced people because they're so scattered everywhere. What I'm curious is, what did you described, like in Zaho, families and small NGOs and individuals coming out with food and clothes. Was it just local organizations, or was it also just ordinary locals that were responding as well?
Both. So we definitely had people who told us that a local NGO, particularly some of the faith-based NGOs there, had come, because they tend to know their own communities and who's coming into them. So they will come out and do kind of, I guess what we think of as formal programming, because they have projects and funding for that sort of thing. But lots and lots and lots of people were just being taken care of by their Kurdish neighbors. We talked to some people in Erbil who said it was interesting. They were not getting food distributions at the time. All of the children in particular were clearly quite healthy and not suffering from malnutrition. And it turned out, we found out through our interpreter, that the Kurdish neighbors were basically feeding them, but they were too embarrassed to tell us that. And, fair enough. But again, that's a really strong statement about how much the Kurds, like the host community, are doing for these people.
What you're describing is an emergency. I mean, when coming back to Washington, D.C., do you feel like there's a sense of emergency here?
I think we're bringing that. I think a lot of the advocacy organizations are bringing the sense of urgency. And, the humanitarian aid traditionally is done by USAID and to some degree by PRM. And I think they are quickly developing a sense of how urgent the shelter situation in particular is, but everybody needs to keep nudging them for sure. Because the thing is, no matter how much you say, like, we need shelter, winter is coming, winter is 2 to 3 weeks away for the people in Kurdistan. I mean, the main things for winter, besides the shelter, are going to be warm clothing and shoes. So many people walking around barefoot, and you can even get by when the weather's warm. Obviously, it's not ideal, but for winter, there's no way, especially if flooding and snow starts to come. Adequate food, because without proper nutrition, people certainly are going to be much more susceptible to, kind of the wintertime diseases, and not just sort of colds and the flu, but like, communicable diseases that come with colder weather, things like TB and stuff like that. And then no matter how good the shelter is that people get into, they're going to need heaters and fuel for the winter, or else there are probably going to be some very serious consequences.
I want to ask a question about the overall international response. There's been reports that Saudi Arabia had contributed over $500 million to the overall UN response. And I believe that, if I understand correctly, the condition on that money is it has to be spent by March 1st. Are you seeing evidence of those funds being put to use? Like, for example, preparing for winter and other needs? It seems like what happened with that money is that initially, when all the IDPs started coming in, there was really a rush to do, I'm trying to think of like a non-technical word, to get stuff, like immediate stuff to people, like mattresses and blankets and tanks of clean water and that sort of thing. So it hasn't been fully publicized, like which agencies got how much money sort of thing, but a lot of it was clearly spent on getting the basic necessities of life. I mean, as a good example, practically everyone we met had a mattress of some sort. Not the people living in the abandoned lots, for example, but like the people in the schools and the community centers and the churches. Practically everyone had a mattress, for example, or a blanket. So a lot was spent on that. The Saudi money is, a good 3/4 of it is spent / committed at this point, because they had to do all that very quickly. And so again, it's not clear at this point, like how much of it is left, and reporting, you can imagine, like comes out a bit more slowly when you're panicking about getting people ready. But presumably,
yes, some of that is going to be used for winterization, or, for preparing for the change in weather. But as far as like actual numbers, I don't have any idea.
And then what happens after March?
In terms of the funding.
The funding.
Well, yeah, it's a real concern because this 500 million came in, and everyone thought, great, Iraq's taken care of. They'll do everything they need to, but. Keep in mind, too, that $500 million is for all of Iraq. It's not just the KRI. So what we're talking about right now is a smallish population. It's only about half of the people who are displaced. You've got another population this size outside of the KRI who also need help and who arguably are in an even tougher situation than the KRI because access by the aid organizations is so difficult and because of security right now that a lot of organizations, just because of their own safety procedures, are not allowed to work there. And so we're talking about an equal number of people who aren't getting any help at all in many cases. So if they have to build 26 camps for IDPs, that's going to use up a lot of money right there. So it's not as if like extra funding will not be necessary. And keep in mind, people keep moving around still.
I mean, this is, it's a crisis that's not going away.
Yeah.
And then you have even the danger of new displacements.
Exactly.
New waves of displacement.
Exactly. Because, they'd had, so there was displacement in 2013, plus all the Syrian refugees were coming in. Mm-hmm. You had the Anbar wave, you had the Mosul wave, you had the Sinjar wave. I mean, and so, one more is going, potentially is the breaking point. But with things happening the way they are, it could happen.
The U.S. invested in Iraqi civil society. Did you see Iraqi civil society, like these organizations, being leveraged in the humanitarian response?
I wouldn't say being leveraged. Certainly some of the more active ones were just out proactively on their own doing what they could. They're kind of terrific like that. Again, like that's an advantage of small communities, right? You know who's come in, you know what they need, you know where to go to get help for them. Yeah. But there was definitely no systematic outreach to them to get them involved in the larger response. Or, for example, to get them partnerships with the bigger international NGOs that then would subcontract them to do the work, that sort of thing. You've got all these capable people who are just there in their communities and want to help. And so it is really important to figure out who's working out there and what they do and how we can, channel humanitarian aid through them.
If you can share maybe some stories about some of the aid organizations and individuals you met who are responding to the crisis.
One thing that was mostly, in particular in Dohuk and for Zaho, volunteers who just said, look, this is a terrible situation. We need to get out there and help. So we had a man who was normally a taxi driver. And I think because of where he normally drove, he just knew a lot of people and was kind of known in the various communities. He just drove us out to Zaho, stopped at the public park and said, hey, here's an organization that wants to learn about how you're living each day. And he, connected us to people. I mean, they were, of course, all very welcoming, which is part of why this worked. He wasn't working for an organization or getting paid for this. He just thought it was really important to get out there and do stuff. We talked to plenty of people, for people working in our hotel or people in a shop, for example, who said oh yeah, of course I'm giving food to the IDPs who live in the park next door, kind of thing. In the churches, in Erbil in particular, which is where we went to the church compounds more, the congregations there were just coming out as a matter of course. They feel like this is their human kindness kind of thing. Yeah. Just like they were bringing, mattresses and blankets and milk for babies. And these are all the people who are making the local NGOs making their response what it is, right? Because, just like here, everything depends so much on volunteers when you get down at the ground level. Yeah. And there were tons of people who just said, this is a terrible situation. And, in Kurdistan, they know what it is to be refugees and or IDPs and to be displaced. And they're very sympathetic about that.
And beyond preparing for winter and a lot of these basic essential needs, what about looking down the road in terms of durable solutions? Does it seem like there's a plan in terms of, you've got a lot of kids that are going to need schooling and addressing some of those other needs that these families will have? Yeah.
I think at the moment, the long term or even the medium term is not much on people's minds because, again, they're trying to keep people alive through the winter, right? Yeah. Nonetheless, it's, it's always there, the thought for aid agencies and the UN particularly, when can or will these people go back and what do we need to provide them in the meantime? So I think once the winter shelter situation is more sorted out, people are going to start thinking more about education in particular, because there are a lot of kids, and also there are language issues with many of the communities that we're talking about.
And then just so listeners understand, what's the main language issue?
So most of the education in the KRI is done in Kurdish, of course, and many of the Christian minorities, for example, often don't speak Kurdish, and that prevents them from getting work as well.
So it's having more schools or teachers that can teach in Arabic.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that would be it. But then there's also the question of not wanting to set up a whole separate system, right? And so this is the thing, like, how do you balance all of these things and make that happen? So education, certainly healthcare. The healthcare systems in Erbil and Darhouk are really under strain because they are allowing IDPs access for basic care for free. And so even if the system can handle all those people, and if it had the supplies, which it does not, just think how much longer you might have to wait for healthcare when an extra, like, close to 1 million people are using the system. So education, healthcare, and earning a living, basically. You know, whether or not people are allowed to work is one question. Whether or not there is work available is a whole other thing. Dohuk in particular has a very high unemployment rate, and even people who are regular residents of Dohuk have a hard time finding a job. And so for people who are displaced and new, it becomes even more of a complication, as you can imagine. So those are some of the medium and long-term issues that everyone's going to have to be thinking about, and then how to judge whether or not it's safe for people to go back and whether or not they want to. Because in the end, if people don't want to go back and don't feel like it's safe, you really can't force them to.
And what are you hearing from a lot of the families who have fled? Are they talking about eventually going back?
It's really varied. It's interesting. Some people are absolutely adamant we cannot ever go back there. And a lot of it, this was so interesting, a lot of it was just not... It wasn't even a security issue so much as, this is the millionth time we've had to start over from scratch and I can't do it again. So that was definitely an overriding sentiment. There are lots of people, though, who, yes, want to go back as soon as they possibly can. And they know that their homes may be gone and their properties lost, but they want to go back and basically start over again. So there was quite a range of responses on that, yeah.
For our listeners, what can they do? What are some of the organizations that are part of the humanitarian response that they could support?
Yeah, I mean, the United Nations is always kind of at the top of a large humanitarian response, right? So it's worth checking into what they're doing and what organizations you might want to fund. But also, you have kind of the range of big international organizations, the International Rescue Committee, the International Medical Corps, Mercy Corps, for example. So they're all working there as well. But in addition to that, it is possible to give money to organizations that will funnel it down to the local NGOs in Iraq as well. Now, you'd have to work a little harder to figure out who's doing that, but you can even call Mercy Corps and say, do you have local partners? Are you funding them? And ask if they're working with local people. So there are ways to make that money trickle down. And on top of that, I mean, there's always a question in foreign aid and foreign affairs of are we going to continue helping this country? Are we going to give humanitarian aid? Are we going to help with development? And the US government makes a lot of those choices. So anyone who votes, in theory, can call their senator or representative and say, this is an issue that matters to me. And through the convoluted process that we have, that should be, funneled up and make a difference.
Yeah. What are some of the messages? What are some of the specific things that the U.S. government can do better? Or even concerns about where things seem to be heading?
Yeah. One thing is it's really important that we not be conflating military intervention with humanitarian aid. So to pay as much attention to humanitarian assistance as we do to military support is really important. So, I mean, you can imagine we put tons more cash into military interventions than into humanitarian aid, including for Iraq, right? Yeah. So just making sure that the humanitarian response is not forgotten, because it is obviously as important as everything else, is one important message. Also, funding levels in anything dealing with international affairs go up and down. And, everyone's always looking for a way to cut funding for projects. But, I think the message that, it matters that we keep funding humanitarian operations in Iraq is another one that, has some resonance with policymakers in particular.
And what about USAID in terms of a longer term strategy to support Iraq's peace and development? What about that side of it in terms of the longer term solution?
Also needs support, and something we should be asking for. Again, those are subject to funding cuts and, where can we spend less money and how important is this really? And we need to be telling policymakers and appropriators in particular for the budget that these things matter, and we expect there to be longer term involvement for Iraqi, I don't know if nation building is exactly the word that I want, but for these institutions basically that make the country work and will kind of set it up to be independent more than it is at the moment.
Cool. Was there any closing thoughts that you want to share with our listeners?
I think the main thing is just these, emergencies like this and displacement situations kind of come and go in the media and the news and in our thoughts, and just like keep in mind this is going to be a long-term situation with displacement in Iraq. It's got a long history already, right? This didn't just start kind of recently. Yeah. And so it just, people need to keep paying attention to what's going on.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
We'd like to thank Daryl Grisgraber and Refugees International for joining us for today's show.
And we'd also like to thank Rahim El-Hajj for sharing his beautiful music for our Iraq Matters podcast.
During the interview, Taif, you heard Daryl talk about this emergency. The organizations that are responding to this humanitarian emergency, UNHCR, UNICEF, International Medical Corps, International Rescue Committee, Mercy Corps, all of these are organizations that are right now trying to do their best to respond to the emergency. And I hope that our listeners will take a moment to consider these charitable organizations in their year-end giving.
Make sure you follow our conversation on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
And you can also subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher.
This is Taif.
This is Eric.
Reminding you that Iraq matters.